I stood in my own kitchen pretending I didn't remember what day it was, while my son quietly unscrewed the labels from my medication bottles like I wasn't even there. "Don't worry," Brittany whispered, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through me. "She won't remember this tomorrow anyway." My daughter avoided my eyes. So I smiled, soft, confused, harmless, and asked, "Is it Monday?" The way they looked at each other? That was the moment I realized something far worse than forgetfulness was happening in my home. And the truth, I wasn't the one losing my mind. I was the only one still seeing clearly. If you've ever trusted someone who slowly changed right in front of you, I want you to stay with me. And before we go further, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single comment. And if stories like this speak to you, don't forget to like and subscribe. My name is Leona Sanders. I'm 67 years old, and until recently, I believed I understood the people I loved better than anyone in this world. I spent most of my life as a school librarian in Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, quiet, and full of purpose. I knew every child who walked through those doors. I remembered what they liked to read, what they were afraid of, what made them feel seen. I built my life on paying attention. At home, I did the same. My husband Robert used to joke that I noticed things before they even happened. He would say, "Leona, you don't just see people, you read them." And for 42 years of marriage, that gift never failed me. Until it did. Robert passed away 18 months ago. A sudden heart attack on a quiet Sunday morning. One minute he was making coffee, the next. My entire life shifted into something unrecognizable. Grief is strange. It doesn't just take the person, it rearranges everything around them. The house feels bigger, the silence feels heavier. Even the sunlight seems different, like it's shining into a place it doesn't quite belong anymore. For the first few months, I was alone. Truly alone. Michael called occasionally. Claire sent polite texts. They had their own lives, their own responsibilities. I understood that. I never wanted to be the kind of mother who clung too tightly. But then something changed. About 6 months after Robert's passing, Michael started coming by more often. At first, it felt comforting. He would bring groceries, fix things around the house, sit with me at the kitchen table, and ask how I was doing. Claire followed soon after. My daughter, who had always been warm but distant, suddenly began calling me every few days. She started ending our conversations with, "I love you, Mom," in a way she hadn't since she was a teenager. And Brittany surprised me the most. She had always been polite but reserved, the kind of woman who smiled perfectly but never quite let you see behind it. Yet now she was showing up with casseroles, offering to help reorganize my pantry, even suggesting we start family dinners every Sunday. "If we don't take care of each other now," she said, once placing a hand gently over mine, it was exactly the kind of thing a daughter-in-law should say. And for a while, I believed it. I told myself I was lucky, that not every widow got this kind of support, that maybe, just maybe, Robert's absence had brought us all closer together. But I've spent my entire life reading people, and slowly, something began to feel off. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just small things, the kind of details most people would overlook, conversations that stopped the moment I entered a room. A glance between Michael and Brittany that lasted half a second too long, Claire asking questions that felt misplaced. "Do you still handle all your banking yourself, Mom?" she asked one afternoon, stirring her tea without drinking it. "Of course," I said lightly. "Why wouldn't I?" she smiled. "No reason. Just making sure it's not overwhelming." Overwhelming. That word stayed with me. Then there were the subtle corrections. "Didn't you already tell me that story, Mom?" Michael said once, even though I hadn't. "You left the stove on earlier," Brittany mentioned casually, though I knew I hadn't been near it. "You've been forgetting things lately," Claire added, her voice soft, concerned. At first, I brushed it off. I thought maybe grief was making me more sensitive. Maybe I was imagining patterns where there were none. But then it started happening more often, and more deliberately. One evening, about 3 months ago, everything shifted. It was late. I had gone to bed early, but I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, but not silent. There's a difference. Silence is still. Quiet carries something underneath it. I got up to get a glass of water and walked halfway down the hallway when I heard voices coming from the den. Michael and Brittany. I wasn't trying to listen, but when you hear your own name, something inside you stops your feet before you can think. "We can't wait too long," Brittany was saying. Michael sighed. "I know, but we need to be careful." Careful, she replied. If her memory really is slipping, we need to have paperwork in place before she changes anything. My heart stopped. Changes anything. Michael lowered his voice, but I could still hear him. We don't even know if it's that bad yet. That's exactly why we act now, Brittany said, sharper this time. Before she realizes what's happening, there was a pause. Then Michael said something that felt like it reached into my chest and tightened around my lungs. I don't want this to turn into a mess. A mess. 42 years of marriage. A lifetime of building a home, raising children, creating stability, reduced to something that could become inconvenient. I stood there in the hallway barefoot, holding onto the wall like it was the only thing keeping me upright. They weren't worried about me. They were preparing, planning, and worst of all, they were waiting for me to become something less than myself. I went back to my room without making a sound. I closed the door. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at my hands for a long time. For the first time in my life, I didn't recognize my own family. And that's when the thought came to me. Not all at once, not fully formed, just a quiet, dangerous idea that slipped into my mind and refused to leave. What if I gave them exactly what they thought was happening? What if I let them believe my memory was failing? Would they protect me or would they take advantage of it? I didn't sleep that night. Because deep down, I already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. By morning, the idea hadn't gone away. If anything, it had settled into something heavier, something more deliberate. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee growing cold in my hands, staring out the window at the quiet street I had lived on for over 20 years. Everything looked the same. The same trees, the same mailboxes, the same neighbor walking her dog at exactly 7, 1, 5 a.m. But inside me, something had shifted. I had spent my entire life being careful, being fair, being understanding. I raised my children to be kind. I believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt. Even after what I heard the night before, a small part of me still wanted to believe there had been some misunderstanding. But another part of me, the part Robert always trusted, was telling me something else. Pay attention. That voice had never lied to me before. So instead of confronting them, I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew would tell me the truth no matter how uncomfortable it was, Diane Collins. We had been friends for over 30 years. She had been a nurse for most of her life, the kind who had seen everything, birth, death, families at their best and their worst. Diane didn't romanticize people. She understood them. She answered on the second ring. "Leona, you okay? I hadn't even said anything yet." That's how well she knew me. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not." There was a pause. Then her voice softened. "Tell me what happened." So I did. I told her about the conversation, about Brittany's tone, about Michael's hesitation that sounded more like calculation than concern, about the way the word paperwork had echoed in my mind long after I returned to bed. Diane didn't interrupt. She just listened. When I finished, there was silence on the other end for a few seconds. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. "They're not just talking, Leona." I closed my eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said carefully, "that's how it starts. I've seen it before. Families convince themselves they're helping while slowly taking control. Sometimes it's out of fear. Sometimes it's about money. Sometimes it turns into something uglier." I swallowed. "You think they'd actually, I don't know what they'd do," Diane cut in gently. "But I know this, if they're already discussing paperwork behind your back, they're thinking ahead. And if they believe your memory is slipping," she let the sentence hang, "they'll move faster," I finished. "Yes." The word sat heavy between us. I stared down at my hands again, noticing the faint tremble in my fingers. "I don't want to accuse them of something they haven't done," I said. "But I also don't want to be naive." "You're not naive," Diane replied. "You're aware." "That's different." I let out a slow breath. "What would you do?" I asked her. There was a long pause this time, longer than before. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. It was steadier, more measured. "I would find out exactly who they are when they think you can't protect yourself." My heart skipped. "How?" She didn't answer immediately. I could almost hear her thinking. Then she said it. "You let them believe what they're already suspecting." I felt the air leave my lungs. "You mean—" I hesitated, even saying it out loud felt unreal. "Pretend, yes." The word landed quietly, but it carried weight. "You don't accuse. You don't confront. You observe, Diane continued. You give them space to show their true intentions. And you pay attention. I stood up from the table and began pacing slowly across the kitchen. That feels wrong, I said. It is wrong, she agreed. But so is what they might be doing. I stopped walking. What if I'm wrong, I asked. What if they really are just worried? Then you'll know that too, Diane said, and nothing will be lost. I thought about that. If they were truly concerned, they would respond with patience, kindness, respect. But if they weren't, a chill ran through me. What if it goes too far? I asked quietly. Diane's voice softened again. Then you won't be alone. I'll be right here. And if you do this, we do it carefully. Carefully. That word mattered. I nodded to myself even though she couldn't see me. Okay, I said finally. There it was. The moment everything changed. We spent the next hour talking through what that would look like. Not something dramatic. Not exaggerated. Subtle. Early signs, Diane explained. Nothing that would immediately raise alarms with doctors, but enough to make your family believe their suspicions are right, like what I asked, forgetting small things, repeating questions, misplacing items, losing track of time occasionally. I listened closely, committing every detail to memory. You don't overdo it, she added. That's important. Real decline isn't consistent. Some days are clearer than others. I almost smiled at that. Even now, I was studying behavior the way I used to study students, but this time, the stakes were different. What about documentation? Diane asked suddenly. Documentation. If something is happening, you need a record of it, not just your memory. I glanced toward the bookshelf in the living room. I can keep notes, I said. Hidden, she emphasized. Somewhere they won't think to look. I'll figure something out. Another pause. Then Diane said something that stayed with me long after we hung up. Leona, this isn't just about them. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? It's about you too, she said. About whether you're willing to see the truth, even if it hurts. I didn't answer right away. Because I already knew the answer. I am, I said finally. After we ended the call, I stood in the middle of my kitchen for a long time. The house felt different again. Not emptier. Sharper. Like every object, every corner, every shadow might hold something I hadn't noticed before. I walked over to the counter and picked up my keys. Then I paused. Slowly, deliberately. I set them down in the wrong place. Not where they belonged. Somewhere slightly off. Just enough. My heart began to beat faster. It had started. Later that afternoon, Claire stopped by unexpectedly. Hey, Mom, she said, stepping inside with a bright smile. I was in the neighborhood. I smiled back, softer than usual. A little slower. Oh, Claire, I said, as if I needed a second to recognize her. Something flickered across her face. Just for a moment. Then it was gone. How are you feeling today? She asked, watching me closely. I hesitated. Just long enough. I'm fine, I said. I think. Claire's eyes sharpened. And in that instant, I saw it. Not concern, not fear. Something else. Something calculating. And that was when I understood something that made my chest tighten. They were already watching me. Waiting. And now, I was watching them back. It's a strange thing, pretending to lose yourself while you're more aware than you've ever been. The first few days I kept my performance small, careful, measured. I asked the same question twice in the span of an hour. I left my reading glasses in the refrigerator. I stood in the hallway one afternoon and hesitated as if I couldn't quite remember where I had been going. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be proven, just enough to plant doubt. And they noticed. Of course they noticed. Claire was the first to react. "Oh, Mom," she said softly when I asked her for the second time what day it was. Her voice trembled just enough to sound genuine. She reached for my hand like she used to when she was little. For a moment, just a moment, I felt something real there. Something warm. But it didn't last. Because when she thought I wasn't looking, her expression changed. It sharpened, like she was filing something away. Michael came by later that evening. He watched me more than he spoke. That was always his way, quiet, observant. But now there was something else behind his eyes. Not worry, assessment. "How are you feeling today, Mom?" he asked, leaning against the kitchen counter. I looked at him, letting a small pause stretch between us. "I'm all right," I said slowly. "I think I had something to do today, but I can't remember what it was." Michael nodded, but he didn't look surprised. He looked confirmed. Maybe you've just been tired, he said carefully. You've been through a lot. Yes, I murmured, lowering my gaze. Tired. That was a safe word. A gentle explanation. But Brittany didn't use gentle explanations. She arrived the next morning with a container of muffins and a smile that was just a little too bright. Good morning, Leona, she said, setting the container on the counter. I thought I'd stop by and check on you. Check on me. I smiled faintly. That's kind of you, I said. Her eyes flicked across the kitchen, taking everything in the placement of objects, the state of the sink, the mail on the table. Inventory. She turned back to me. Did you have breakfast yet? She asked. I'm not sure, I said, tilting my head slightly as if trying to remember. Her smile widened. Well, that's okay, she said. We'll just make sure you eat something now. That word again. I nodded, letting her guide me toward the table like I needed direction, and that's when I noticed it. The shift. It was subtle. If I hadn't been watching closely, I might have missed it. The way she spoke, just a little slower. The way her tone softened, but not with kindness. With control. Like she was adjusting herself to match what she believed I had become. Sit here, she said, gently placing a plate in front of me. I obeyed, not because I needed to, but because I needed to see how far she would go. Later that afternoon, Michael returned. This time, Brittany stayed. The two of them moved through my house together with a quiet familiarity that felt invasive. They opened cabinets without asking. They rearranged things. They spoke to each other in low voices while glancing in my direction. At one point, I walked into the living room and stopped. A framed photograph, one of my favorites, Robert and I on our anniversary trip, was missing from the shelf. I stared at the empty space. Where's the picture? I asked. Brittany appeared beside me almost instantly. Oh, she said lightly. I moved a few things around. Sometimes too many photos can be confusing. Confusing. I looked at her, letting my expression soften into uncertainty. Oh, I see, I said. Inside, something twisted. That photograph had been in that exact spot for 12 years. She hadn't moved it for me. She had moved it because she could. Because she believed I wouldn't remember it had ever been there. That night, Claire came over again. All three of them sat at the kitchen table with me, the atmosphere strangely organized. Like this wasn't just a visit, it was a meeting. How have things been today, Mom? Claire asked, her voice careful. I blinked slowly. I think I had breakfast twice, I said, with a small, embarrassed smile. Claire reached out and touched my arm. That's okay, she said quickly. That happens. Michael leaned forward. Have you noticed any other changes, he asked. Changes. I pretended to think about it. Sometimes I feel a little lost, I said. Brittany nodded, as if that confirmed something she already believed. That's exactly what we've been noticing, she said softly. And we just want to make sure you're safe. Safe. I looked down at my hands. I appreciate that, I whispered. And for a moment, the room fell quiet, but not in a comforting way. In a waiting way, like they were all listening for something else, watching for something more. Then Claire spoke again. Mom, have you thought about maybe letting us help with some things? She asked gently. Like what I asked? Just little things, she said quickly. Bills, appointments, groceries. It might make things easier for you. Easier for you. I nodded slowly. That might be nice, I said. And that was it. That was the moment something shifted. Not in me, in them. I saw it in the way Michael relaxed slightly, in the way Brittany's shoulders lowered just a fraction, in the way Claire's voice became more confident. Permission. That's what they felt they had just received. Later that night, after they left, I sat alone at the kitchen table in the dim light. The house was quiet again. But this time, it felt different. Not empty. Observed. I stood up slowly and walked to the bookshelf in the living room. From the second shelf, I pulled out one of Robert's old atlases. It was worn, the edges softened from years of use. Carefully, I opened the back cover. Earlier that day, while Brittany was in the kitchen, I had made a small cut along the inside seam, just enough to slide something in. From my pocket, I pulled out a folded piece of paper. My handwriting. Neat. Precise. Documenting everything. Dates. Times. Words. Behavior. I slid the paper into the atlas and closed it gently. This was no longer just a test. It was a record. Proof. Because what I had seen today, it wasn't concern. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even confusion. It was something far colder. They weren't reacting to my decline. They were adjusting to it, adapting, positioning themselves. And as I stood there in the dim light of my living room, one thought settled deep in my chest. This was only the beginning. By the end of the week, the house no longer felt like mine. Not because anything obvious had changed, but because of the way they moved through it. Like it was already becoming something else. Something I no longer fully belonged to. Brittany was the one who crossed the line first. She started coming over without calling. At first it was small things. I was just in the area, she'd say, already halfway inside before I could answer the door. I thought I'd help out a little. Help. That word had begun to mean something entirely different. One morning I came into the living room and stopped cold. 3 more framed photos were gone. Not rearranged. Gone. Family moments. Birthdays. Robert holding Michael as a baby. All of them missing. I stood there staring at the empty spaces on the wall, my chest tightening. "Brittany," I called out. She appeared from the hallway holding a small box. "Oh, good, you're up," she said brightly. "Where are the pictures?" I asked. She glanced at the wall, then back at me. "Oh, those," she said casually. I put them away. "Why?" I asked, my voice softer now. She tilted her head slightly, her expression shifting into something almost patient. "Sometimes too many visual memories can be overwhelming," she explained gently. "We want to keep things simple for you." "We?" Again. I nodded slowly as if that made sense. "Oh, all right," I murmured. But inside something cracked. Those weren't just pictures. They were my life. And she had decided without asking that I didn't need them anymore. Later that day, I noticed something else. My jewelry box. It was always kept in the top drawer of my dresser. Robert had given it to me on our 25th anniversary. When I opened the drawer, it was gone. This time I didn't call out right away. I stood there looking at the empty space, letting the moment settle. Then I walked into the kitchen. Brittany was there again. Of course she was. "Oh," she said when she saw me. "I was just making sure you had lunch." I smiled faintly. "That's kind of you," I said. Then I hesitated. "Just enough. I can't seem to find my jewelry box," I added quietly. Her reaction was immediate. Too immediate. "Oh, I moved that," she said quickly. "Just for safekeeping." "Safekeeping," I repeated. "Yes," she said, her tone softening again. "You've been a little forgetful lately. I didn't want anything to get lost." "Lost." I nodded. "That makes sense," I said. "But I didn't ask where it was." And she didn't offer. That told me everything I needed to know. Michael's role was different. Less visible. More strategic. 2 days later, Mrs. Henderson from next door stopped me while I was getting the mail. "Leona," she said gently, her expression full of concern. "How are you feeling, dear?" I blinked at her. "I'm fine," I said. She hesitated. "Well, Michael mentioned you've been having some memory trouble." There it was. I felt something cold settle in my chest. "Oh," I said softly. "Did he?" She nodded, reaching out to squeeze my hand. "He's just worried about you." Of course he was. That evening when Michael came by, I watched him carefully. "You talked to Mrs. Henderson," I said, as if the thought had just occurred to me. He froze for half a second. Then he smiled. "Just mentioned you've been a little forgetful," he said lightly. "So she'd keep an eye out." "Keep an eye out." I nodded slowly. "That's thoughtful," I said. And he believed me. That was the most frightening part. He believed I didn't understand what he was doing. Claire, on the other hand, was more subtle, more careful, but no less intentional. She started bringing things over. Folders, papers, forms. She never pushed them directly, just left them nearby, on the kitchen table, on the counter, within reach. One afternoon she sat across from me with a soft smile. "Mom, I brought some documents that might help us organize things," she said. "Organize?" I asked. Just in case, she said quickly. "You know, to make things easier." There was that word again. Easier. I picked up one of the papers, letting my eyes drift over it without focusing too hard. Power of attorney. I blinked. "What's this?" I asked. Claire leaned forward, her voice gentle. "It's nothing urgent," she said. "Just something we can think about, so we can help you if you need it." "If you need it." I nodded slowly, then set the paper down. Look at it later, I said. She smiled. Of course. But her eyes lingered on the document. Waiting. Measuring. I didn't touch it again. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat at the kitchen table with the lights dimmed. The house was quiet. But my mind wasn't. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, folded notebook page. Then I stood and walked to the bookshelf. The atlas, my hiding place. I slipped the new page inside, adding to the growing record. Every detail, every word, every shift in tone. This wasn't just about what they were doing. It was about how they were doing it, slowly, carefully, convincing themselves it was justified. That's what made it so dangerous. And then there was Ethan. I noticed him more now, watching, always watching. He didn't say much, didn't interfere, but his eyes followed everything. One afternoon, I found him standing in the hallway looking toward the kitchen where Brittany was rearranging cabinets. He turned when he saw me. "Grandma," he said quietly. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied. He hesitated, then stepped closer. "Are you okay?" he asked. The question was simple, but the way he asked it wasn't like the others. There was no performance, no hidden intention, just concern, real concern. I smiled at him. "I'm all right," I said softly, but he didn't look convinced. His gaze flicked toward the kitchen, then back to me. "I don't think they're treating you right," he whispered. My heart tightened. I glanced toward the kitchen, making sure Brittany couldn't hear us. "Why do you say that?" I asked gently. Ethan hesitated. Then he shook his head. "I don't know," he said. "It just feels wrong. Wrong." Such a simple word, and yet it held more truth than anything the adults had said all week. I reached out and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for telling me that," I said. He nodded, but his expression didn't change. He was worried, and that worried me, because Ethan was starting to see what was happening, and that meant things were no longer contained. They were spreading, affecting more than just me. As I stood there in the hallway holding my grandson's hand, one thought settled heavily in my mind. This wasn't just a test anymore. It was becoming something bigger, something deeper. And I had to be careful, because the more they believed I was losing control, the more they were going to take. The first time they spoke about my future as if I weren't sitting right there, something inside me didn't just hurt. It shifted. It was a Friday evening when Michael announced we were having dinner. Not asked, announced. "I thought it'd be nice if we all sat down together tonight," he said, already halfway through my refrigerator like he had lived there his entire life. Brittany stood beside him, organizing ingredients into neat rows on the counter. Claire arrived shortly after, carrying a bottle of wine and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's been too long since we've done this," she said brightly. Too long. They had been in my house almost every day. But I nodded anyway. "That sounds nice," I said softly. I played my part. By now, it came more naturally than I wanted to admit. Dinner was set at my own table, my plates, my glasses, my memories surrounding us, and yet I felt like a guest. They spoke easily at first. Work, traffic, Claire's son Ethan and his school. Normal things, comfortable things. But underneath it, there was something else, an undercurrent, like they were waiting for the right moment to steer the conversation where they really wanted it to go. And then Brittany did. "I've been doing a little research," she said, casually cutting into her food with precise movements. Michael didn't look up, but I saw the slight tightening in his shoulders. Claire took a sip of wine, eyes flicking toward Brittany. "Research." I lowered my gaze to my plate, pretending to focus on my food. "Research," I echoed faintly. "Yes," Brittany said, her voice soft but deliberate. "About memory care options." The room didn't freeze. It shifted, subtly, like everyone leaned into the moment at the same time. I blinked slowly. "Oh," I said, "why would we need that?" Brittany's expression softened immediately, the practiced kind of soft. "Well," she said gently, "we've all noticed you've been a little forgetful lately." A little. Claire reached across the table, placing her hand lightly over mine. "It's nothing to be ashamed of, Mom," she said. "We just want to make sure you're safe." "Safe." Michael finally spoke. "We're just talking about options," he added. "Nothing's decided. Nothing's decided." Yet, I let my hand rest under Claire's for a moment before slowly pulling it back. "I see," I murmured. And then I made a choice. I looked up at them, letting uncertainty fill my expression. I didn't realize it was that bad, I said quietly. That was all it took. Brittany leaned forward slightly. It's not bad, she said quickly, but it's something we should plan for early. That way everything is easier. Easier. That word again. Always that word. Claire nodded. There are really nice places, she added. Places where you'd have help structure, people around all the time. People around all the time. As if loneliness had ever been my problem. I glanced down at my plate, then back up again. What would happen to the house, I asked, letting the question come out slowly like it had just occurred to me. There it was. The real conversation. Michael and Brittany exchanged a look. Quick, practiced. Well, Michael said carefully, we'd figure that out when the time comes. Figure it out, not keep it for you, not make sure it stays yours. Just figure it out. Claire jumped in quickly. You wouldn't have to worry about any of that, she said. We'd handle everything. Of course you would. I nodded again. That sounds helpful, I said. And that's when Brittany smiled. Not the polite smile she usually wore. Something else, something satisfied. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of careful words and measured tones, but the mask had slipped, and I had seen what was underneath. Later that night, after they left, I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I stood there gripping the edge of the sink, staring at my reflection. My face looked the same lines, the same eyes, but there was something different in them now, something harder. I turned on the faucet, letting the sound of running water fill the room, and then I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, because no matter how prepared I thought I was, hearing them talk about removing me from my own life while I sat right there was something I hadn't fully braced myself for. I stayed there until the tears stopped, until the shaking in my hands settled. Then I turned off the water, dried my face, and looked at myself again, and this time I didn't look away. The next morning I made the call. George Whitaker answered on the third ring. Leona, he said warmly. It's been a while. George had been Robert's attorney for over 25 years. More than that, he had been a friend. The kind of man who didn't speak often, but when he did, people listened. I need your help, I said. There was no hesitation. Tell me what's going on. So I did. I told him everything. The conversations, the behavior, the documents, the dinner, the way they had spoken about my future as if it was already decided. George didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then he exhaled slowly. All right, he said. First things first. Have you signed anything? No. Good, he said immediately. Do not sign anything. Not now, not later. Not without me reviewing it. I won't, I said. And Leona, his voice shifted slightly. Do they believe you're cognitively impaired? I hesitated. Yes, I said quietly. Another pause. Then surprisingly, all right, he said again. That might actually work in your favor. I blinked. How? If they think you're not fully aware, they may become less careful, he explained. People tend to reveal more when they believe they're not being observed. My grip tightened on the phone. I've already started documenting things, I said. Good, he replied. Keep doing that. Dates, times, exact wording if you can remember it. I have, I said. Then here's what we're going to do, George continued. We move carefully. We gather information. And we make sure that if they attempt anything legal, they don't succeed. My heart steadied slightly. For the first time in days, I didn't feel completely alone. They were talking about evaluations, I added. Medical ones. George's tone sharpened. That's important, he said. If they're trying to establish incapacity, we need to be ahead of that. Ahead, I'll guide you through it, he assured me, but you have to stay calm. Don't confront them yet. I won't, I said. Good, he replied. Because right now, they think they're in control. I glanced around my kitchen. At the cabinets Brittany had rearranged, at the empty spaces where my photographs used to be, at the chair where I had sat while they planned my future. They're not, I said quietly, and for the first time since this began, I truly meant it. The following week, everything became sharper. Not louder, not more obvious, just clearer. Like a fog had lifted, and suddenly I could see the edges of everything they were doing. George came to the house on Tuesday afternoon. We didn't make it obvious. He parked down the street instead of in the driveway, and I let him in through the side door like an old friend dropping by for coffee, which in many ways he was. But this visit was different. This time we were preparing. I brought copies, he said, placing a slim leather folder on the kitchen table. Copies of everything that mattered. Robert's estate plan, the trust documents, the amendments he had made in the final year of his life. My hands trembled slightly as I sat down across from George. I didn't realize there were so many layers, I admitted. George gave a small, knowing nod. Robert was thorough, he said. He believed in protecting what he built. Especially for you. Something tightened in my chest at the mention of my husband. Even now, even after everything, there were moments when I still expected him to walk into the room. What did he do? I asked quietly. George opened the folder and turned it toward me. What your children see, he said, tapping the top page, is only part of the picture. I leaned forward, focusing. The house, your primary accounts, the visible assets, those are in your name. Straightforward. Accessible. I nodded. That's what they're looking at, I said. Yes, George confirmed. And that's what they're planning around. He flipped to another page. But Robert anticipated complications. My breath caught. He created a protected trust, George continued. One that holds the majority of your long-term assets. Investments. Property shares. Funds they don't know about. I stared at him. They don't know, I asked. No, he said calmly. And unless you choose to tell them, they won't. A strange mixture of relief and sadness washed over me. Relief because they weren't as close to taking everything as they thought. Sadness because Robert had seen something coming that I hadn't. He was worried about Michael, George added gently. His spending habits. The way he handled risk. I closed my eyes briefly. That sounded like Robert. Always seeing the things I wanted to believe would work themselves out. And Claire, I asked. George hesitated for a moment. Her financial situation has been unstable for a while, he said. Robert didn't trust that she wouldn't make impulsive decisions if given full access. I nodded slowly. It hurt to hear it, but it didn't surprise me. What does that mean now? I asked. It means, George said, leaning back slightly, that even if they think they're positioning themselves to control everything, they're not. I let that sink in. All their planning, all their quiet conversations, all their assumptions, built on something incomplete. Then why not just tell them, I asked. George's expression sharpened, because right now he said they're showing you who they are when they believe you're vulnerable. I looked down at the table. And if you reveal everything too soon, he continued, you lose that clarity. Clarity. I exhaled slowly. So we wait, I said. We observe, he corrected gently. There was a difference. And I understood it. After George left, I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time. The house felt different again. Not smaller, not heavier, just more controlled. Like I had taken something back without anyone noticing. But we weren't finished. Not even close. That evening, Diane came over. Unlike George, she didn't need to be discreet. She walked in like she always had, direct, grounded, steady. Well, she asked, setting her bag down. He planned ahead, I said. Diane raised an eyebrow. Robert always did, she replied. I told her everything, the trust, the hidden assets, the way my children were operating on incomplete information. When I finished, Diane let out a low whistle. They have no idea what they're actually dealing with, she said. No, I agreed. And that gives you leverage. Leverage. The word felt strange, uncomfortable, but accurate. I don't want this to turn into a game, I said quietly. Diane looked at me carefully. It already has, she said. I didn't argue, because she was right. The next part of the plan was her idea. If they're already talking freely, she said, we need to hear it. Hear it, I asked. Exactly what they're saying when they think you're not fully aware. I frowned slightly. I've been writing everything down. That's good, Diane said, but memory, real or not, can be questioned. She paused. Recordings can't. The word hung in the air. Recordings. I felt a flicker of hesitation. That feels invasive, I admitted. Diane didn't sugarcoat it. So is what they're doing, she said. I looked away, toward the hallway, toward the rooms they had started to move through like they belonged to them. They're already treating your life like it's transitioning, she added. You need proof of how they're doing it, proof Not just for me, for George, for anything that might come next. I nodded slowly. All right, I said. That night, after Brittany and Michael left, Diane and I moved quietly through the house. She worked with the kind of calm precision that only comes from experience. Small devices, hidden carefully, the den, the kitchen, the spaces where conversations naturally happened. Nothing obvious, she said, just enough. I watched her, my heart beating steadily but firmly. This wasn't who I had been, but it was who I needed to be now. When we finished, Diane turned to me. You're doing the right thing, she said. I wasn't sure if I believed that, but I knew I couldn't stop. The next morning everything looked the same furniture, the same light through the windows, the same quiet hum of the house. But now, the house was listening. And so was I. Later that afternoon, Michael and Brittany came over again. They didn't know anything had changed. That was the point. I sat in the living room pretending to flip through an old magazine. I forgot what I was looking for, I murmured to myself. Brittany smiled from the kitchen. That's all right, she called out. Happens all the time. All the time. I lowered my gaze, letting the moment pass. But inside, I was waiting. Because now, for the first time since this began, I wasn't just reacting. I was collecting, and whatever they said next would no longer disappear into memory. The first time I listened to their voices when they thought no one was truly hearing them, I almost turned it off. Not because I couldn't understand what they were saying, but because I could. Diane had shown me how to access the recordings, simple, discreet, nothing complicated. A small device hidden where no one would think to look, another tucked into the edge of the den bookshelf. I waited until the house was quiet, until the footsteps had faded, until I was alone. Then I sat at the kitchen table, the same place where they had smiled at me, reassured me, guided me, and I pressed play. At first there was nothing, just the soft hum of the room, the faint clink of dishes, normal sounds. Then Brittany's voice, clear, calm, unfiltered. I don't think we have as much time as we thought. My hand tightened around the edge of the table. Michael responded quieter. We don't even have a diagnosis yet. That doesn't matter, Brittany said. It's obvious where this is going. Obvious. I closed my eyes briefly. She still seems aware sometimes, Michael added. There was a pause. Then Brittany laughed softly. Not kindly. Michael, she said, that's how this works. Good days, bad days. You can't wait for it to get worse before you act. Act! The word echoed through me. I just don't want to push too fast, Michael said. If she notices, she won't. Brittany cut in. The confidence in her voice made my stomach turn. She already forgot what day it was twice yesterday, she continued, and she couldn't even remember where she left her glasses. I opened my eyes. My glasses had been exactly where I left them. She had moved them. She's declining, Brittany went on. We need to start positioning things now. Positioning. There it was again. The careful language, the quiet strategy. Michael exhaled slowly, and Claire, he asked, Do you think she'll... She's already on board, Brittany replied. I felt something inside me tighten. She just doesn't want to be the one pushing it, Brittany added, but trust me, she knows what's at stake. What's at stake? I stopped the recording. My hand hovered over the device. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the words. It was how easily they said them. How natural it sounded. Like this wasn't something they had struggled with. It was something they had accepted. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. Then slowly, I pressed play again. This time it was Claire's voice. Different day, different conversation, but the same tone. Frustrated, sharp. I've been trying to be patient, she said, but this is dragging out. Dragging out. She's our mother, Michael replied. Yes, Claire said quickly, and I've done my part. I've called, I've visited, I've helped, but I can't keep putting my life on hold while she fades. Fades. The word hit harder than I expected. You're not putting your life on hold, Michael said. No, Claire snapped. You think I'm not. Do you know how much I've sacrificed already? Sacrificed. I pressed my lips together. There was a pause. Then Claire's voice softened slightly. I'm not saying we do anything cruel, she continued. I'm just saying we need to be realistic. Realistic. About what Michael asked. About what happens next, she said. About what she leaves behind. Leaves behind. I leaned back in my chair, my chest tight. That's what this was about. Not my safety, not my care, my ending. She was a good mother, Claire said after a moment. For a second, my heart lifted. But then she finished the sentence. That's the problem. I froze. What does that mean? Michael asked. It means she always gave us everything, Claire said. And now she thinks that means we owe her something back. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. Don't we? Michael asked quietly. Claire let out a short, almost bitter laugh. No, she said. That's not how life works. I stopped the recording again. This time I didn't press play right away. I just sat there, letting the silence settle around me, letting the weight of what I had just heard sink in. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about control. It was about how they saw me, what they believed I was worth, and more importantly, what they believed they owed me. Nothing. I picked up the device again, my fingers slightly unsteady. There was more. Of course there was more. I pressed play one last time. Brittany's voice filled the room again. Colder this time. More direct. We should start thinking about timing. Timing. Michael didn't respond immediately. Timing for what he asked finally. For moving her, Brittany said, "Before things get complicated." Complicated. She's not there yet, Michael said. She's getting there, Brittany replied. And if we wait too long, it'll be harder to justify. Justify. The word made my stomach turn. They weren't just planning. They were preparing a narrative. We'll need a doctor, Brittany continued. Someone who can confirm what we're seeing. And if they don't, Michael asked. There was a pause. Then Brittany said something that made my blood run cold. Then we make sure they do. I turned the recording off immediately. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat there, my hands resting flat on the table, my heart pounding in my chest. For the first time since this began, I wasn't just hurt. I was afraid. Not of them exactly, but of how far they were willing to go. I stood up slowly, pushing the chair back. The house felt different now. Not just observed, exposed, like every wall held something I hadn't fully understood before. I walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street. Everything looked the same. Normal. Peaceful. But inside this house, something had changed. Something irreversible. I turned away from the window and walked toward the bookshelf, the atlas, my record. I pulled it down carefully and opened it, adding a new page, new entries, new evidence. But this time my handwriting wasn't as steady, because what I was writing now wasn't just documentation. It was confirmation. They weren't guessing. They weren't reacting. They were planning. And as I closed the atlas and placed it back on the shelf, one thought settled deep in my mind. This was no longer about finding out the truth. I already had it. Now. It was about what I was going to do with it. The hardest part of pretending to forget is choosing what to remember. After listening to the recordings, I moved through the house differently, more carefully, more deliberately. Every word they had said echoed in my mind: timing, positioning, justify. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was strategy. And for the first time, I realized something else. I wasn't the only one watching. Ethan was too. I noticed it more clearly now, the way he lingered in doorways, the way his eyes followed conversations, the way he stayed quiet when the others spoke as if he were trying to piece something together. Children don't always understand everything, but they feel everything. And Ethan, he felt it. That afternoon, the house was quieter than usual. Michael and Brittany had left after a short visit, and Claire was upstairs going through a stack of old boxes she said she wanted to organize. I was sitting in the living room pretending to read when I heard soft footsteps behind me. "Grandma," I turned slowly. Ethan stood there, hands in his pockets, his expression uncertain. "Yes, sweetheart," I said gently. He hesitated. Then he walked closer and sat down across from me. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just looked at me, really looked at me. And I realized he wasn't looking for signs of confusion. He was looking for truth. "Can I ask you something?" he said finally. "Of course." He lowered his voice. "Are you really forgetting things?" The question hung between us. Simple, direct, dangerous. I felt my chest tighten. Of everyone in this house, he was the one person I didn't want to lie to. But I had to be careful. Not just for myself. For him. I tilted my head slightly, letting a faint uncertainty touch my expression. "Why would you ask that?" I said softly. Ethan frowned. "Because sometimes you seem confused," he said, "but other times you don't." I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch. Then I reached out and placed my hand over his. "Ethan," I said quietly, "what have you seen?" His eyes flickered. He glanced toward the hallway, then back at me. "A lot," he whispered. My heart skipped. "Like what?" He hesitated again. Then the words came out quickly. "Mom was in your office yesterday," he said. "She said she was looking for something, but she was opening drawers and taking pictures of papers." My breath caught. "Did she see you?" I asked. He shook his head. "No." I nodded slowly. "What else?" Ethan swallowed. "Brittany's been moving things," he said. "Not just cleaning. Like hiding stuff." I closed my eyes briefly. I already knew that, but hearing it from him made it real in a different way. "And Dad," Ethan continued, his voice dropping even lower. "He got really mad at me last night." I opened my eyes. "Why?" "Because I asked him why you can't just stay here," Ethan said. "He said I don't understand how things work." Of course he did. "Did he say anything else?" I asked gently. Ethan hesitated. Then he nodded. He said it's not my place to question decisions that are already being made. Already being made. I felt something cold settle in my chest. They weren't just planning anymore. They were deciding. I squeezed Ethan's hand slightly. "You did nothing wrong," I said softly. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "Something's not right," he said. "Not wrong. Not unfair. Not confusing. Not right." There was a difference. And he felt it. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice. "You're very observant," I told him. He didn't smile. "Are they going to send you away?" he asked. The question hit harder than anything else. Because it wasn't asked out of curiosity, it was asked out of fear. I took a slow breath. "I don't know," I said carefully, which was the closest thing to truth I could give him. Ethan's shoulders tensed. "I don't want you to go," he said quietly. I reached out and gently brushed his arm. "I'm not going anywhere without making sure everything is okay," I said. That at least was true. He studied my face for a moment, then nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. Before he stood up, he leaned in slightly. "If you need help," he whispered, "you can tell me." My heart tightened again, because he meant it. At 14 years old, he was offering me something none of the adults in this house had. Loyalty. "I know," I said softly, and I did. After he left, I sat there for a long time staring at the empty chair across from me. Ethan had just confirmed something I had been trying not to fully admit. This wasn't contained. It wasn't controlled. It was affecting him. And that changed everything. I stood up slowly and walked to the kitchen. My movements were calm, measured. But inside, something had shifted. Again, this wasn't just about exposing my children anymore. It was about protecting someone who still believed in what family was supposed to be. Later that evening, Claire came downstairs. She smiled when she saw me. "Hey, Mom," she said. "I found some of Dad's old files. I might organize them tomorrow." I nodded, letting my expression remain soft. "That sounds nice," I said. She studied me for a moment, then walked closer. "Did you eat?" she asked. "I think so," I said. Her smile returned. But now, I could see it clearly. Not warmth, not love, relief. As if every small sign of my decline made things easier for her. "I'll make sure you have dinner later," she said. "Thank you," I replied. She turned away, heading back toward the hallway. And as she did, I saw something in her hand. A small key. Not hers. Mine. From my office drawer. I didn't react, didn't speak, didn't move. I just watched her walk away. And in that moment, I understood something that settled deep into my bones. They weren't just waiting for me to disappear. They were already taking pieces of my life, one at a time, quietly, carefully, confidently, and if I didn't stop this soon, there might not be anything left to protect. They chose the day for me. Of course they did. By the time Michael told me about the appointment, everything had already been arranged. "It's just a routine check," he said one morning, standing in my doorway like a man delivering something reasonable. "We thought it might help to have a professional take a look." A professional. I sat on the edge of my bed, folding the corner of my blanket between my fingers as if I needed something to ground me. A look at what I asked softly. Michael hesitated just long enough to make it seem natural. At how you've been feeling, he said. Your memory. Nothing serious. Nothing serious. I nodded slowly, letting my gaze drift. If you think that's best, I murmured. His shoulders relaxed. That small surrender, that quiet agreement, it gave him exactly what he wanted. Control. The drive to the clinic was quiet. Brittany insisted on coming along. Claire met us there. Of course she did. They weren't going to miss this. The building itself was clean, bright, carefully neutral, the kind of place designed to make everything feel manageable, even when it wasn't. I walked in between them, my steps just slightly slower than usual. Just enough. Inside, Brittany handled the check-in. Spoke for me. Answered questions before I could open my mouth. Leona Sanders, she said smoothly. She's been experiencing memory issues for a few months now. A few months. I lowered my gaze, letting the words pass over me. Some confusion, repetition, occasional disorientation, she continued. Disorientation. I said nothing. Claire stood beside her, nodding gently, her expression carefully concerned. Michael hovered just behind them, quiet, watchful. It was almost impressive, the way they had coordinated this. When the nurse called my name, Brittany stepped forward immediately. We'll come with her, she said. The nurse smiled politely. Of course. We moved together down a narrow hallway. I kept my pace slow, measured. My heart was steady, but only because I forced it to be. This was the moment they had been building toward, and I had to play it perfectly. The doctor was a man in his early 50s, calm eyes, observant. He greeted me first, not them. Mrs. Sanders, he said, offering a small smile. I'm Dr. Harris. Hello, I replied softly. He gestured toward the chair across from him. Why don't you have a seat? Before I could respond, Brittany stepped in. She's been having trouble lately, she said, her tone gentle but firm. We've noticed changes in her memory. Dr. Harris nodded, but his eyes flicked to me. Not to her. To me. That was the first sign. Is that right? He asked. I hesitated, letting uncertainty fill the space. I'm not sure, I said quietly. Brittany leaned forward. She forgets things constantly, she added. Important things. Repeats herself. Gets confused. I kept my gaze lowered. But inside, I was listening. Carefully. Dr. Harris picked up a pen. And how long have you noticed these changes? He asked. A few months, Claire said quickly. Maybe longer, Brittany added. Michael said nothing. Just watched. Dr. Harris nodded again. Then he did something they didn't expect. He turned back to me. Mrs. Sanders, he said gently, how have you been feeling? The room shifted, subtly, because for the first time, the question was directed at me. I looked up at him. Let my eyes soften. I forget things sometimes, I said. But I don't always feel confused. Brittany opened her mouth, but Dr. Harris raised a hand slightly, not rudely. Just enough. I'd like to hear from her, he said calmly. The silence that followed was small, but powerful. I continued. Sometimes I feel slower, I added, but I still know where I am, who I am. Dr. Harris nodded thoughtfully. Then he asked me a series of questions, simple ones. What day it was, where I lived, who the president was. I answered some correctly. Missed a few, just enough. Carefully balanced, not too sharp, not too impaired, controlled. I could feel Brittany watching me, measuring, calculating, waiting for me to slip, but I didn't. Not in the way she needed. After a while, Dr. Harris set his pen down. I'd like to speak with Mrs. Sanders alone for a few minutes, he said. The reaction was immediate. Oh, Brittany said, her smile tightening. We usually stay. It won't take long, he replied calmly. There was no room for argument. Reluctantly, they stepped out. The door closed. And for the first time since we arrived, the room felt quiet. Real quiet. Dr. Harris leaned back slightly, and his voice changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. You're not as confused as they think you are, he said. I looked at him. Really looked at him. No, I said quietly. He nodded. I thought so. There was no surprise in his voice. Just confirmation. They're pushing for a diagnosis, he added. Have they talked to you about that? Yes. And do you feel safe at home? The question landed differently than anything else he had asked. Not clinical, not procedural, personal. I hesitated. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I understood what the answer meant. I don't feel heard, I said carefully. Dr. Harris studied me, then nodded slowly. That's important, he said. He reached for his notes. I'm not going to make any definitive diagnosis today, he added. There's not enough consistent evidence. Relief washed through me. Quiet. Controlled. But I would recommend follow-up, he continued. And I'd like you to come back alone next time. Alone. I nodded. I understand, I said. He looked at me for a moment longer, then said something that stayed with me long after I left. Be careful who speaks for you, he said. Then he opened the door, and they came back in. All three of them. Expectant. Watching. What did he say? Brittany asked immediately. Dr. Harris kept his tone neutral. We'll need more evaluation, he said. It's too early to make any firm conclusions. Too early. I saw it happen. The shift. Subtle. But there. Brittany's smile tightened. Claire's brows furrowed slightly. Michael exhaled. Not relief. Frustration. On the way home, the car was quieter than before, but not in the same way. This time, there was tension underneath it. Unspoken. Unresolved. Brittany finally broke the silence. Well, she said lightly, these things take time. Time. Michael didn't respond. Claire stared out the window. I sat in the back seat, my hands folded in my lap. Silent. Still. But inside, everything was clear. They hadn't gotten what they wanted. Not yet. And that made them dangerous. Because people who don't get what they want the first time don't usually stop. They adjust. And as we pulled into my driveway, one thought settled firmly in my mind. This wasn't the end of their plan. It was just the part where it got harder to hide. Something changed after the appointment. Not on the surface. On the surface, everything still looked the same. Visits, meals, gentle voices, careful smiles. But underneath, the patience was gone. They had expected certainty. A diagnosis. A piece of paper that would make everything easier. And when they didn't get it, something in them hardened. It started that very evening. Michael came back alone. No Brittany, no Claire, just him. That in itself was unusual. He stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside, his expression tighter than usual. Hey, Mom, he said. Hi, I replied softly. I stayed seated at the kitchen table, my hands folded loosely in front of me. He didn't sit down right away. Instead, he walked around the room slowly like he was trying to organize his thoughts, or maybe control them. Finally, he turned toward me. What happened in there? He asked. The question was direct. Too direct. I blinked, letting confusion settle into my expression. In where? I asked. His jaw tightened slightly. At the appointment, he said, You were doing better than you usually do. Better? I tilted my head slightly. I felt okay, I said. That's not the point, he replied, his voice sharpening. There it was, the edge. He exhaled quickly, running a hand through his hair. We're trying to help you, he added, softer now, but not softer in a kind way, softer in a controlled way. I know, I said quietly. And I did. I knew exactly what kind of help they were trying to give. Michael looked at me for a long moment. Searching, testing. Then he nodded once. All right, he said. We'll figure it out. Figure it out. The same words, the same tone. But this time, they felt different. Less patient, more urgent. After he left, I sat in silence for a long time. Then I reached for the recording device, because I needed to know what came next. The next day, I didn't have to wait long. Brittany and Claire came over together. They thought I was in the living room. I wasn't. I stood just outside the kitchen doorway listening. She threw it off, Brittany said quietly. I know, Claire replied. I saw it. We need to be more careful, Brittany continued. We can't rely on one evaluation. Claire sighed. This is getting complicated. Complicated. There are other ways, Brittany said. My heart tightened. What do you mean? Claire asked. Patterns, Brittany replied. Documentation. Consistency. Consistency. They were building something. A case. We just need enough to make it undeniable, Brittany added. Undeniable. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that made my chest ache. "I don't want this to drag out," she said. "The longer it takes, the worse it gets. The worse it gets. Not for me. For them." "For who?" Brittany asked softly. Claire didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "For everyone. Everyone." I stepped back silently, moving away from the doorway. I had heard enough. More than enough. That night, something else happened. Something I hadn't expected. And somehow, it was worse than everything before. I couldn't sleep. The house felt too still, too quiet, so I got up and walked down the hallway. As I passed the den, I heard voices again. Lower this time, more controlled. Michael and Brittany. I stayed where I was, just outside the door. "We can't keep waiting," Brittany was saying. Michael exhaled. "I know." "No, you don't," she said. "Because if you did, you'd understand what's at stake." What's at stake? There it was again. "I do understand," Michael replied, his voice tense. "But this isn't something we can rush." "It is if we want to stay ahead of it," Brittany shot back. "Ahead? Ahead of what?" There was a pause. Then Michael said something that made my stomach drop. "She embarrassed me in there," he said. Embarrassed. At the doctor's office. I felt my fingers tighten against the wall. "That's not the point," Brittany replied. "It is to me," Michael said. "It made it look like we were exaggerating. Exaggerating. So we adjust," Brittany said coldly. "Adjust." "How?" Michael asked. Another pause. "Then we move her sooner." The words landed like a blow. My breath caught. "Soono," Michael said quickly. "That's too fast." "Is it?" Brittany challenged. "Because from where I'm standing, the longer she stays here, the more unpredictable this becomes." Unpredictable. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. "She's still functioning," Michael said. "For now," Brittany replied. "For now." Silence filled the room. Heavy. Thick. Then Brittany spoke again. Lower this time. More deliberate. "I've already started planning," she said. "Planning." "What kind of planning?" Michael asked. "The house," she said simply. "The house." Everything inside me went still. "What about it?" Michael asked. "I've been looking at what needs to be updated," Brittany said. "What could be sold? What could be changed?" "Changed." "She's still living here," Michael said. "And she won't be for long," Brittany replied. The certainty in her voice, it was absolute. Not hopeful, not tentative. Certain. I stepped away from the door. Carefully, quietly. My heart was pounding now. Not from fear, from clarity. They weren't just talking anymore. They weren't just preparing. They were acting, deciding, moving forward. Without me. Without my consent. Without even pretending anymore. I returned to my room and closed the door softly behind me. Then I sat down on the edge of my bed, and for a long time, I didn't move. Because something inside me had finally settled. All the doubt, all the hesitation, all the hope that maybe, just maybe, I had misunderstood something. Gone. Completely gone. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't concern. This wasn't even misguided love. This was control. And it was escalating. I reached for my phone, my hand steady now. "Certain." I dialed George. He answered quickly. "Leona, they're moving faster," I said. There was a pause. Then his voice sharpened. "Tell me everything." And I did. Every word. Every shift. Every plan I had overheard. When I finished, George didn't hesitate. "Then we don't wait," he said. My heart steadied. "What do we do?" I asked. There was a brief pause. Then he said it. "We bring everything into the light." The light. A confrontation. Not emotional. Not reactive. Strategic. "How?" I asked. "We control the setting," he said. "We choose the moment. And we make sure they don't see it coming." I closed my eyes briefly. A family gathering. A reason to bring them all together. Somewhere they wouldn't suspect. "I can invite them over," I said. "For what?" George asked. I thought about it for a moment. Then I smiled faintly. "Because I'm afraid my memory is getting worse," I said. George was quiet. "Then perfect," he replied. I opened my eyes. And for the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting anymore. I wasn't observing. I wasn't waiting. I was preparing. And whatever happened next was going to happen on my terms. The days leading up to Sunday felt longer than anything I had lived through in years, not because time moved slowly, but because everything inside me had finally gone still. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. Even the heartbreak had settled into something quieter, clearer. I wasn't waiting for answers anymore. I had them. Now I was preparing to reveal them. George and Diane came over again on Thursday afternoon. This time, we didn't hide it as much. If anyone asked, George was simply reviewing paperwork, and Diane was checking in. Roles that made sense. Roles that wouldn't raise suspicion, at least not immediately. But inside the house, everything was different. We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where so many quiet betrayals had unfolded, and laid everything out. The recordings, the notes, the timeline. George listened carefully, his expression growing more focused with every piece. "This is more than enough," he said finally. I looked at him. "Enough for what?" "For clarity," he replied. "For confrontation. And if necessary, for legal protection." Legal protection. The words felt heavy, but justified. Diane leaned forward, her hands folded. "They're not going to expect this," she said. "That's your advantage." I nodded slowly. "They think I don't understand what's happening," I said. "And that's exactly why this works," George added. We went over everything, step by step. Not emotionally, strategically. When they arrived, George said, "You let them settle in. Let them feel comfortable." Like any other family gathering, Diane added. I could almost picture it. The smiles. The casual conversation. The illusion of normal. And then I asked. George's voice was calm. "Then you take control of the room." I held his gaze. "How?" He didn't hesitate. "You stop pretending." The words landed quietly. But they carried weight. Finality. Diane reached over and touched my hand. "You've done everything you needed to do," she said softly. "Now you show them what they didn't expect." I exhaled slowly. A part of me still felt the weight of what was coming. Not fear, but something deeper. Grief. Because no matter how justified this was, these were still my children. That night, after they left, I walked through the house alone. Every room, every hallway, every space that had slowly been taken from me, piece by piece. I paused in the living room, looking at the empty spots on the walls where my photographs used to be. I could still see them. In my mind, every memory, every moment, untouched, unchanged. No one could take that. I moved into the bedroom and opened the dresser, the space where my jewelry box had been. Still empty. I closed the drawer gently. Then I stood there for a moment, letting everything settle. This wasn't about getting those things back. Not anymore. This was about something else, something bigger. Respect, truth, control. The next morning, Claire stopped by again. Unannounced. "Of course." "Hey, Mom," she said, stepping inside. "I thought I'd check on you." I smiled faintly. "I'm glad you did," I said. She looked at me closely. "You seem different today." Different. I let my expression soften. "I feel a little confused," I said quietly. Her shoulders relaxed. "Just slightly." "Good. That's what she needed to see." "That's okay," she said gently. "We're here to help you through it. We, always we." I was thinking, I added slowly, "Maybe we could all have lunch together this weekend." Claire blinked. "All of us, yes," I said. "Michael, Brittany, Ethan too." Her expression shifted. Surprise. Then something else. Relief. "That's a great idea," she said quickly. "I think that would be really good for you." "For me?" I nodded. "I don't want to feel alone," I said softly. That did it. Completely. Her voice warmed instantly. "You're not alone, Mom," she said. "We're all here." I held her gaze, smiled, and said nothing. Later that day, Michael called. Claire had already told him. "Sunday works," he said. "We'll all be there." "Of course you will." Brittany texted shortly after. "We'll bring food. Don't worry about anything." "Don't worry." I almost laughed. But I didn't, because I needed them exactly where they were, comfortable, confident, unaware. That evening I sat at the kitchen table with the atlas open in front of me. The final page. I read through everything one last time, every note, every date, every word. Then I closed it gently. No more writing. No more observing. Everything I needed was already there. Saturday night was the hardest, not because of what might happen, but because of what had already happened. I sat in the living room with the lights dimmed, staring at the empty wall where Robert's photograph had been. "I wish you were here," I whispered, "not for protection, not for guidance, just to see this, to understand it, to remind me that I hadn't imagined the life we built, that it had been real, that I had been a good mother, even if they no longer saw me that way." I sat there for a long time, until the silence felt less heavy, until the ache in my chest settled into something I could carry. Then I stood up, turned off the lights, and went to bed. Sunday morning arrived quietly, the kind of quiet that comes before something changes. I woke up early, made coffee, moved through the house slowly, deliberately, not as someone pretending anymore, but as someone preparing. By noon, everything was ready. The table set, the chairs arranged, the room exactly as it had always been. Familiar, safe, normal, at least on the surface. The doorbell rang at exactly 1207. Claire and Ethan. Right on time. "Hi, Mom," Claire said, stepping inside with a bright smile. Ethan followed quietly, his eyes scanning the room. Watching. Always watching. "Hi," I said softly. Michael and Brittany arrived shortly after, carrying food, smiling, relaxed. They greeted me the way they always had these past few weeks, gently, carefully, like I might break, and I let them, for now. We sat, we talked, we ate. The conversation flowed easily, almost too easily, like nothing had ever changed, like everything was still intact, but beneath it, I could feel it. The tension, the expectation. They thought this was just another step, another moment of control, another sign that I was slipping further away, and I let them believe it, until the moment came, because I knew, when I stood up, everything was going to change. There's a moment right before everything changes when the world feels almost normal. That's what Sunday felt like. We sat around the table, plates half full, glasses untouched, sunlight spilling softly across the room like it had 100 times before. Claire laughed at something Michael said. Brittany reached for the salt like she belonged there. Ethan sat quietly, his eyes moving between all of us. And I played my role one last time. I asked Claire the same question twice. I paused in the middle of a sentence as if I had forgotten where I was going. I smiled gently when Brittany corrected me. They were comfortable, relaxed, certain. That was important, because what came next depended on that certainty. I set my fork down slowly, looked at my hands, let a small silence fall over the table. Then I spoke. "I've been feeling worse lately." Claire's expression softened immediately. "Oh, Mom!" Michael leaned forward slightly. "What do you mean?" he asked. I hesitated. Let the moment stretch. "I get confused more often," I said quietly. "Sometimes I don't recognize things the way I used to." Brittany nodded, her tone gentle. "That's okay," she said. "That's why we're here." I looked up at her, held her gaze, for just a second longer than usual, and then something inside me shifted, completely. I straightened in my chair, my shoulders settling into a posture I hadn't used in weeks. My voice, when I spoke again, was no longer uncertain, no longer soft. It was clear, steady, unmistakably present. I know exactly what's happening in this house. The silence that followed wasn't gradual, it was immediate, total. Claire's hand froze mid-air. Michael blinked. Brittany's smile didn't drop right away, but it cracked, just slightly. And that was enough. I pushed my chair back and stood up, slowly, deliberately. No hesitation, no confusion, nothing they had come to expect. "What are you talking about?" Claire asked, her voice suddenly tight. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't hide anything. I remember everything I said. The words landed clean, sharp, final. Michael stood up too. "Mom, no," I said, cutting him off, not loudly, but firmly. He stopped, because something in my voice had changed, something he hadn't heard in a long time. Control. I reached for the small device on the side table, picked it up, held it in my hand. Brittany's eyes flicked to it immediately. Recognition, fear. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. No one answered. I didn't wait. I pressed play. Brittany's voice filled the room. Clear. Cold. "I don't think we have as much time as we thought." Claire's face drained of color. Michael's jaw tightened. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his eyes wide. I let it play. Every word, every plan, every quiet calculation they thought would never be heard. "We need to start positioning things now. She won't remember this anyway. We make sure they do." I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before. Claire's hands were shaking. Michael looked like he had been hit. Brittany recovered first. "Of course she did. This is unbelievable," she said, her voice rising slightly. "You've been spying on us," I held her gaze. "I've been protecting myself," I replied calmly. "That's not protection," she snapped. "That's manipulation. Manipulation." The word almost made me laugh. "Is it?" I asked quietly. Claire finally spoke. "Mom, why would you do this?" she said, her voice breaking. I turned to her. "Because I needed to know who you are when you think I can't defend myself." Her eyes filled with tears. "I was just trying to help you," she said. "No," I said gently. "You were trying to manage me." The truth landed harder than anger ever could. Michael stepped forward. "You're twisting this," he said. "We were concerned about you." I nodded. "You were concerned," I agreed, "about timing, about positioning, about what happens to my house." His expression hardened. "That's not fair," he said. "Isn't it?" I asked. I reached for another device. Pressed play again. Claire's voice this time. "She was a good mother. That's the problem." Claire gasped. "Turn that off," she said quickly. "I didn't. She thinks that means we owe her something." I stopped it there. Looked at her. "I never thought you owed me anything," I said softly. "But I did think I deserved honesty." Tears slipped down her face. "I didn't mean it like that," she whispered. But we both knew she had. Michael ran a hand through his hair. "This is insane," he muttered. "You set us up." "I gave you space," I corrected. "To what?" he snapped. "To show me the truth," I said. Brittany stepped forward now, her composure cracking. "This is cruel," she said. "You made us believe you were losing your mind." I held her gaze. "And what did you do with that belief?" I asked. She didn't answer. Because she couldn't. I took a slow breath. Then I stepped aside slightly. "George," I said. The door opened, and he walked in. Calm, composed, expected. Brittany's face went pale. "What is this?" she demanded. "Clarity," George replied. He set a folder on the table, opened it. "These are the legal documents regarding Leona's estate," he said. Michael frowned. "We already know about that," he said. George shook his head. "No," he said. "You know part of it." He turned the pages toward them. "The majority of the assets are held in a protected trust," he continued, "one that you do not control." The room shifted again. Not emotionally this time. Legally. "What does that mean?" Claire asked, her voice unsteady. "It means," George said calmly, "that everything you've been planning around is incomplete." Brittany stared at the documents. Her confidence gone. Michael stepped back slightly. "That's not possible," he said. "It is," George replied. Silence fell again. This time, heavier. Because now, they understood. Not just what I had done, but what they had lost. I looked at them. All of them. My children. My family. And for the first time since this began, I wasn't wondering who they were. I knew. "I gave you every chance," I said quietly. No one spoke. No one moved. And in that moment, everything we had been pretending finally ended. Silence has a different weight when truth settles into it. Not confusion, not tension, finality. That's what filled the room after George finished speaking. No one moved, no one spoke, not even Brittany. And for the first time since I had known her, she didn't have anything to say. Michael stood near the table, his hands resting against the edge as if he needed something solid to hold on to. Claire sat frozen, her eyes moving between the documents and my face like she was trying to understand how everything had slipped so far out of her control. Ethan hadn't moved at all. He was still sitting in his chair watching everything unfold with a kind of quiet clarity that didn't belong to someone his age. George closed the folder slowly. The sound of it echoed louder than it should have. "These documents are valid and enforceable," he said calmly. "And based on recent behavior, we will also be reviewing any attempts at unauthorized access or coercion." Unauthorized access. Coercion. The words weren't emotional. They were precise. Legal. And they changed the air in the room completely. Michael was the first to react. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice tight. "We didn't do anything illegal." "No one said you did," George replied evenly. "But intent matters. Intent." Michael let out a sharp breath. "We were trying to help her," he said, gesturing toward me. "She's been confused, forgetful. I've been pretending," I said. My voice cut through his. Clean. Unshaken. He stopped. Looked at me. Really looked at me. And for the first time, there was no doubt in his eyes. Just realization. "You lied to us," he said. I held his gaze. "I observed you," I replied. "That's not the same thing." "No," I said quietly. "It isn't." Claire finally broke. "I can't do this," she whispered, pushing her chair back slightly. "I can't sit here and be judged like this." "Then don't," I said. She froze, because she hadn't expected that. Not anger. Not punishment. Permission. Her eyes filled again. "You think we're horrible," she said, her voice trembling. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "I think you made choices." Choices. The word landed harder than anything else, because it removed excuses. It removed confusion. It made everything intentional. Brittany stepped forward, then her composure returning in fragments. "This is still manipulation," she said. "You created a situation where we thought you were vulnerable." I looked at her. "And what did you do with that vulnerability?" I asked. She didn't answer. Couldn't. Because now, there was nowhere left to hide. George spoke again. "From this point forward," he said, "any involvement in Mrs. Sanders' financial or legal affairs will be strictly limited." Michael's head snapped up. "What does that mean?" "It means," George said calmly, "you do not have authority." The words were simple, but their impact wasn't. Claire let out a soft, broken sound. "Are you cutting us off?" she asked, looking at me. I took a breath. This was the moment. The one that mattered more than anything else. Not the recordings, not the documents. "I'm setting boundaries," I said. Claire shook her head, tears falling freely now. "That's not the same thing," she whispered. "It is," I replied gently. "It's just not the version you wanted." Michael turned away, running a hand over his face. "This is unbelievable," he muttered. Brittany stepped closer to him, her voice lower now. "We don't have to accept this," she said. George didn't react. He didn't need to, because the truth didn't require defense anymore. It was already there. "I'm not asking you to accept it," I said. They both looked at me. "I'm informing you," I added. Silence. Again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was clear. Ethan shifted in his chair. A small movement. But it drew everyone's attention. He looked at his mother, then at me, then back at her. "Why didn't you just help her?" he asked quietly. The question was simple, but it cut deeper than anything that had been said so far. Claire's breath caught. "I was helping," she said weakly. Ethan shook his head. "No," he said. "You weren't." The room went still, because this wasn't coming from me, or George, or anyone they could argue with. It was coming from him, and they couldn't deny it. Claire covered her mouth, a sob escaping before she could stop it. "I didn't mean for it to be like this," she said, her voice breaking completely now. I looked at her, and for a moment, I saw my daughter again. Not the version shaped by fear or entitlement, but the one I had raised. The one who used to run into my arms without hesitation. "I know," I said softly. "That didn't make it right, but it made it real." Michael turned back toward me. His expression had changed. Not softened, not entirely, but something in it had cracked. "What happens now?" he asked. The question was different from the others. Not defensive, not demanding, just uncertain. I held his gaze. "You go home," I said. Simple, clear, final. Brittany opened her mouth to argue, but stopped, because there was nothing left to argue with. No confusion, no weakness, no opening. Just truth. Claire stood slowly, wiping her face. Ethan remained seated for a moment longer, Then he stood too, but before he moved toward the door, he looked at me. "Are you okay?" he asked. The same question he had asked before, but this time, the answer was different. "Yes," I said, and for the first time in a long time, it was true. He nodded. Then followed his mother. Michael hesitated near the doorway, like he wanted to say something, but didn't know how, or didn't know if he should. In the end, he said nothing, and walked out. Brittany was the last to leave. She paused at the threshold, turned slightly, and for a moment, I thought she might speak, apologize, explain, but she didn't. She just looked at me. And then, she left. The door closed, and just like that, the house was quiet again. But this time, it felt different. Not empty, not heavy, free. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. Then I walked slowly back into the living room. George closed his folder. Diane stepped beside me. Neither of them spoke right away. They didn't need to, because everything that mattered had already been said. After they left, I didn't move right away. I stood in the middle of the living room listening to the silence settle into the walls, into the floor, into the spaces they had occupied just minutes before. It felt unfamiliar at first. Not because I hadn't been alone before, but because this time, the quiet didn't carry confusion or fear, it carried clarity. Diane was the first to speak. "You did exactly what you needed to do," she said gently. I nodded, but I didn't answer. Because what I felt in that moment wasn't victory. It was something softer, heavier, a kind of grief that didn't come from loss, but from recognition. George closed his folder and stepped closer. "We'll follow up on the legal protections this week," he said. "Everything will be secured properly." "Thank you," I replied. And I meant it. Not just for the paperwork, but for standing beside me when things could have gone very differently. They stayed a little longer, not talking much, just being there. And when they left, I was truly alone. The house felt different again, but this time, it belonged to me. Not just legally, emotionally. Every room, every object, every memory. Untouched, unclaimed, mine. That night, I walked through the house slowly. The living room, the hallway, the kitchen. I stopped in front of the wall where my photographs used to hang. The empty spaces no longer felt like something taken. They felt like something waiting. The next morning, I began putting things back, one by one. Every photograph Brittany had removed, I found them carefully packed in a box in the storage closet. Of course, she hadn't thrown them away. She didn't see them as valuable, only unnecessary. I held each frame in my hands before placing it back on the wall. Robert's smile, Michael as a baby, Claire at her high school graduation. Moments frozen in time. Moments that meant something, whether they remembered it or not. By the time I finished, the wall looked like mine again. Not perfect, not untouched, but real. The days that followed were quiet, not empty, just calm. George handled the legal adjustments quickly. The trust remained protected. Access was restricted. Everything was exactly where it needed to be. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't waiting for something to happen. I was simply living. Diane visited often. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. But her presence reminded me of something important. That not all relationships required effort to survive. Some simply remained. Ethan came by the following weekend, alone. That surprised me, but it didn't concern me. I opened the door and saw him standing there, hands in his pockets, just like before. "Hi," he said. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied. He stepped inside slowly, looking around the house, taking everything in. "It looks different," he said. I smiled faintly. "It feels different, too," I said. He nodded. We sat together in the living room. No pressure, no tension, just quiet understanding. After a while, he spoke. "Mom's been different," he said. I didn't ask how. I didn't need to. "I think she's sad," he added. I looked at him. "That can happen," I said gently. He hesitated. "Are you mad at her?" he asked. I thought about that, really thought about it. "No," I said, and it was the truth. Not because what she had done didn't matter, but because anger wasn't what I carried anymore. I'm just Careful now, I added. Ethan nodded slowly, like he understood more than he should. I'm glad you didn't leave, he said quietly. I reached over and squeezed his hand. So am I. Claire didn't come. Not right away. Weeks passed. Then a month. And then a letter arrived. Handwritten, carefully addressed. I recognized her handwriting immediately. I didn't open it right away. I held it in my hands for a long time, because I knew whatever was inside would matter. When I finally opened it, I read it slowly. Every word. No excuses. No justifications. Just honesty. She wrote about fear, about pressure, about how easy it had been to follow the direction everything seemed to be going, and how hard it had been to see it clearly once she was inside it. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for anything. She just told the truth. When I finished reading, I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. Not hidden, not displayed, just kept. Because some things don't need immediate answers. They need time. Michael never reached out. Not once. And strangely, that didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. Because I understood something now that I hadn't before. Closure doesn't always come from both sides. Sometimes it comes from within. Weeks turned into months, and slowly. Life settled into something new. Not the life I had before, but not something broken either. Something rebuilt. I started volunteering again, not at the library this time, at a local community center, working with older women, helping them understand their rights, their finances, their boundaries, because I had learned something the hard way, and I wasn't going to let that lesson stay only with me. Eventually, I turned it into something more, a small foundation, in Robert's name, focused on elder protection, legal awareness, support for those who didn't know who to trust anymore. It wasn't large, it wasn't perfect, but it mattered, and so did I. One evening, as I sat in the living room, the sunlight stretching across the floor in that familiar way, I realized something that made me smile. They thought I was fading. They thought I was losing control. They thought I wouldn't see what they were doing. But the truth was, I had never been more present, more aware, more certain of who I was. I didn't lose myself. I found myself. And I did it at the exact moment they believed I was disappearing. That's the part they never understood. And maybe never will. Sometimes the deepest betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people we trust to protect us when we are most vulnerable. And that is what makes them so difficult to face. But here is something I want you to remember, especially if you are watching this and you've lived long enough to know what it means to give your whole heart to your family. Love does not mean surrendering your dignity. Care does not mean losing your voice. And age does not mean weakness. Too often people assume that growing older means becoming smaller, quieter, easier to control. But the truth is, with age comes clarity, experience, strength that doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. What happened to me was painful. There's no way around that. But it also reminded me of something I had forgotten. That boundaries are not cruelty, they are protection. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to step back from the people who no longer treat you with respect. Forgiveness is personal. Reconciliation is optional. You can wish someone healing without giving them access to hurt you again. And that is not weakness. That is wisdom. If this story touched you in any way, I would really love to hear from you. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your city right now. Have you ever had to set a boundary with someone you loved? Do you believe family should always be forgiven? Or are there moments where distance is necessary? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read them all. And if stories like this speak to your heart, please don't forget to like and subscribe, because sometimes the stories we need most are the ones that remind us who we really are.